Amidst the philosophers of the Enlightenment period, few can rival the intellectual capacity of the sage of Leipzig. Known as a mathematician, logician, and metaphysician, his ideas have profoundly influenced many traditions, including both secular and religious dogmas. This man is known as Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz of Saxony. Leibniz, much like Aristotle, presents contributions that, when closely examined, can serve as devastating critiques of key Christian dogmas. His formal contributions, such as the principle of the identity of indiscernibles, extend the classical law of identity into a more refined and modern framework. As to fulfill Leibniz's law of indiscernibles, it states that if two entities X and Y are identical, then they must share all the same properties. This principle has profound implications for philosophical theology, particularly in its challenge to the coherence of certain Christian doctrines. Thomists affirm a distinction between formal and material identities between the persons of the Trinity, which means the persons are identical in their material identity, being the divine essence for existence, but are formally distinct from each other through the opposition of relations between the hypostatic properties for their personhood. The properties being paternity for the Father, filiation for the Son, and spiration for the Holy Spirit. As Aquinas says, the idea of relation, however, necessarily means regard of one to another, as one is relatively opposed to another. So as in God there is a real relation, there must also be a real opposition. The very nature of relative opposition includes distinction. Hence there must be real distinction in God, not indeed according to that which is absolute, namely essence, wherein there is supreme unity and simplicity, but according to that which is relative. Looking closely at what Aquinas is saying, he is actually presenting a defeater to his own theology. The syllogism goes as follows. Premise 1. For all entities X and Y, if X is identical to Y, then every property P that applies to X must also apply to Y. Premise 2. If there exists at least one property that the Father has and the Son does not have, then the Father and the Son are not identical to the same being. Premise 3. The Father possesses a property that the Son does not possess. Conclusion. Therefore the Father and the Son are not identical to the same being. Since Thomists fail to fulfill this law, they have no choice but to affirm that they are not committed to this notion of identity. But the problem in this is that not only is this just a more refined definition of the law of identity that Aristotle affirms, but it also shows that Thomists cannot adhere to classical logic. Simply put, in order for something to be identical to something else, they would have to simply just be the same in reality. Relative relations cohere under the reality of the principles of origins of the persons that allow them to be distinguished. But the problem is that if there is a distinguishing feature in reality, this creates a multiplicity of existences. The reason is because the properties that are the distinguishing features are allocated to persons. This entails the persons to be different in reality. That difference creates a non-identical relation between one person in reality to another. And since all of them are in reality, this also accounts for their existence to be different and not grounded on the divine essence. Just like humans that are identified as being identical to human does not collapse other humans in the world to the same being just because their material identity is identical. Similarly, the existence is rooted with the essence of a subject and the properties that are allocated to the subjects. If the properties of a subject are distinct from another subject, their essence and therefore existence cannot be identical. There may be some individuals who will appeal to relative identity. Not only would this appeal be against classical logic and identity, this wouldn't even apply to the Trinity without other contradictions arising. Nobody is even committed to this notion of identity, and the ones who object must give an account for it. Not only that, why doesn't classical identity suffice for the Trinity? Does this mean the Trinity is incompatible with classical logic and identity? Regardless, let us be charitable and generous to our Trinitarians and grant them this to be nice. Relative identity posits an identity relation under a sortal, but the problem is that the Trinity does not exist under time, or else this would lead to contingency, which is a contradiction to the nature of the Trinity and its posited necessity. Relative identity, in an example, would be a lump of clay and a statue of clay are identical to the same material clay, even if the statue and lump are different in the form that it takes, which looks an awful lot like the earlier appeals to material and formal distinctions. This identity theory does not work under synchronic cases of identity, it only works under diachronic. Synchronic meaning identity at a single point without consideration of change over time. Diachronic meaning identity over time that does consider its development and change. However, no Trinitarian affirms God to be within time, or else this would negate his necessity as to be under time as an accidental. In conclusion, appeals to relative identity, formal and material distinctions, opposition of relations, all fail to give an account for the Trinity to maintain monotheism without contradiction or falling into heresy. Thank you for watching and see you all next time. God bless.
Agus